There's a moment many senior drivers don't expect until it happens to them. A letter from the DMV, a renewal requirement they didn't see coming, or a new rule that quietly changes what used to be a simple process. And in some cases, it's not just paperwork anymore. It can carry financial penalties, delays, or even a temporary suspension if not handled correctly. Now here's the question. Do you think driving rules for seniors are becoming more about safety or more about control and regulation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's carefully break this down in a clear, legal, and practical way. In my legal analysis, driving regulations for senior citizens in the United States are not based on a single federal law, but rather on a combination of state-level DMV policies and constitutional principles that allow states to regulate road safety. That means every state has the authority to set its own rules for license renewal, vision testing, and medical evaluations. Historically, these rules were never originally designed to target seniors specifically. They evolved as road safety systems became more complex and as life expectancy increased, meaning more people remained active drivers later in life. Over time, states began introducing age-linked review thresholds, not as punishment, but as preventive safety checks. Courts would likely examine whether such rules are reasonably related to a legitimate government interest, which in this case is public safety on roadways. Under constitutional law, particularly the Equal Protection Clause, age-based policies are generally evaluated under a rational basis standard, which gives states significant flexibility as long as the rule is not arbitrary or discriminatory. Now, when we talk about new DMV rule changes that may include stricter renewal requirements or additional testing for drivers over a certain age, we are generally talking about administrative safeguards. These may include more frequent renewals, vision screening, or sometimes brief cognitive assessments to ensure continued driving ability. In my legal analysis, the key issue is not whether these rules exist, but whether they are applied consistently and fairly across all eligible drivers within that age category. Now, from a constitutional perspective, the Fourth Amendment is not typically directly involved in DMV licensing decisions because these are administrative actions, not searches or criminal investigations. However, if a driver's information is used in enforcement or investigation contexts, constitutional protections still apply in how that information is handled. The Fifth Amendment may also become indirectly relevant if self-reported medical or cognitive information is later used in legal or administrative proceedings, but again, always within structured due process rules. Now let's talk about real-world impact. For many senior drivers, these changes can feel sudden, especially when they are communicated through official notices without much explanation. In reality, most of these policies are designed to encourage safe driving rather than immediately restrict licenses. But they do require awareness, preparation, and timely compliance. Courts would likely continue supporting the idea that states can adjust licensing standards as long as they maintain fairness, provide notice, and allow individuals a reasonable opportunity to meet requirements. Now let's consider the perspective on both sides. Supporters of stricter senior driving evaluations argue that as reaction times, vision, and cognitive processing can change with age, periodic assessments help reduce road accidents and improve public safety. They view these policies as responsible governance based on statistical safety data. On the other hand, critics argue that age alone should never be the determining factor, and that many older drivers remain among the safest on the road. They emphasize that individual performance should always outweigh general assumptions about age groups. In my legal analysis, courts would likely continue balancing these views by focusing on individualized assessment rather than blanket restrictions. Now let's talk about the legal risk that actually matters in practice. For most drivers, the biggest issue is not criminal liability. It is administrative compliance. Missing a renewal deadline, failing to complete required testing, or ignoring DMV notices can lead to suspension or reinstatement delays. These are procedural outcomes, not criminal penalties, but they can still significantly affect mobility. Now, from a federal versus state law perspective, driving regulation is almost entirely state-controlled. That means rules can differ significantly between states, but all must still operate within constitutional boundaries that ensure fairness and due process. In my legal analysis, this decentralized system is why senior driving laws can feel inconsistent across the country, even though they are all aimed at the same goal: road safety. Now, looking at long-term implications, the direction is clear. DMV systems are gradually moving toward more technology-based evaluations, improved medical reporting integration, and potentially more standardized assessment tools. Courts will likely continue reviewing whether these systems remain fair, non-discriminatory, and reasonably connected to safety outcomes. This means the future is not necessarily about more restriction, but about more structured and consistent evaluation methods. Now, as we bring everything together, the most important takeaway is this. These laws are not designed to take independence away. They are designed to ensure that driving remains safe for everyone on the road while still respecting the rights of individuals who are fully capable of driving responsibly. So here is the final question to reflect on. Do you think senior driving evaluations are a necessary safety safeguard, or do you think they should be based strictly on individual performance without any age-based thresholds? Share your thoughts in the comments. A respectful conversation on this topic matters because it affects families, independence, and public safety all at once. And if you want more clear, fact-based explanations of laws and real-world policy changes that affect everyday life, make sure to subscribe for future updates. Because at the end of the day, laws like these are not just about paperwork or procedures. They are about balancing safety, independence, and dignity in everyday life on the road. Continuing from that point, it's important to understand how these DMV policies actually play out after the paperwork, notices, and requirements leave the system and enter a person's real daily life. In my legal analysis, most disputes or confusion around senior driving rules do not come from the existence of the rules themselves, but from how they are communicated and how consistently they are applied at the administrative level. Courts would likely examine whether drivers are given adequate notice, reasonable time to comply, and clear instructions about what is required. That falls under fundamental due process principles, which require fairness in administrative decision-making, even outside of criminal law. Now, when people hear about new rules or changes affecting seniors, it is very important to separate perception from legal reality. In many cases, the underlying laws do not suddenly change. Instead, DMV enforcement standards or procedural guidelines are updated to reflect new safety data, medical recommendations, or administrative efficiency goals. From a practical standpoint, this means a driver may not lose their license because of one single factor, but rather through a combination of administrative steps that are designed to assess continued driving ability over time. In my legal analysis, this gradual system is intentional. It is meant to prevent abrupt loss of driving privileges while still ensuring that safety standards are met. Now let's talk about enforcement reality. Courts would likely continue to support the idea that states have broad authority to regulate licensing systems as long as those systems remain rational, non-arbitrary, and consistently applied. That is why most legal challenges in this area do not succeed unless there is clear evidence of unfair treatment or procedural violations. At the same time, the law also recognizes that driving is closely tied to independence, especially for older adults. That is why due process protections are important. They ensure that decisions are not made arbitrarily and that individuals have the opportunity to respond, appeal, or demonstrate compliance. Now, from a real-world perspective, one of the most overlooked aspects of these policies is preparation. Many drivers only become aware of changes when they receive official notices, but legally, these systems are designed with advanced communication and renewal cycles to avoid surprises. Supporters of DMV updates argue that this structured approach actually protects drivers because it gives them multiple checkpoints rather than a single high-stakes evaluation. They emphasize that safety and prevention are the primary goals. On the other hand, critics continue to raise concerns about administrative burden and the emotional impact of repeated testing, especially for drivers who have maintained clean records for decades. In my legal analysis, both perspectives highlight a central tension in administrative law: efficiency and safety versus individual convenience and autonomy. Now, looking at long-term implications, DMV systems are likely to continue evolving toward more data-driven decision-making. This may include improved medical reporting integration, standardized testing tools, and potentially more uniform national guidelines in the future. Even though licensing remains a state responsibility, courts would likely continue evaluating these developments through the lens of fairness, transparency, and constitutional reasonableness rather than eliminating state authority altogether. Now, as we reach the final conclusion of this breakdown, the most important principle to remember is this. These rules are not designed to define someone by age. They are designed to ensure that every driver on the road, regardless of age, meets consistent safety standards that protect both the individual and the public. So here is the final question to reflect on one more time. Do you believe DMV senior driving policies are currently balanced correctly between safety and independence? Or do you think the system needs further reform to better reflect individual capability? Share your thoughts in the comments. Civil discussion is important because these policies affect real lives, real independence, and real families across the country. And if you want more clear, fact-based breakdowns of laws, regulations, and real-world legal changes, make sure to subscribe for future updates. Because in the end, these aren't just rules written in government offices. They are decisions that shape freedom of movement, responsibility on the road, and the way society defines safety for every generation.